You've been lied to about discipline. The habits that actually compound year after year, silently multiplying while others burn out, are never posted online. They don't feel like effort. They leave no trace of struggle, and that's precisely why they work. Elite performers don't rely on willpower. They engineer behaviors so quiet, so frictionless. They bypass resistance entirely. While the world celebrates visible grind, real leverage accumulates in the shadows and actions too small to notice, too precise to explain, and too consistent to reverse. This isn't about motivation, it's about architecture. And what you're about to learn is how the top 1% build systems that compound without them having to try. Most people fail not because they are lazy, but because their habits are too loud. Think about it. Every time you have tried to build discipline, what did you do? You made it visible. You announced it. You stacked it with intensity. Long workouts, hour-long meditations, 3 0-word writing sprints. And for a few days, maybe even weeks, it felt powerful, heroic, even. Then it vanished. Not because you lacked will, but because your brain flagged it as an invasion. Now picture this. A single drop of water falling on a stone. 1 drop does nothing. 2 drops, still nothing. But over months, years, that same stone cracks open, not through force. Through frequency so gentle, the stone never sensed a threat. That is the invisibility threshold. It is the precise point where an action is so small, so frictionless, your basal ganglia, brain as autopilot, absorbs it without triggering resistance. No internal debate, no emotional tax, just silent integration. Take James Clear's famous 2-minute rule. It is not about productivity. It is about stealth. Want to read more? Do not commit to a chapter. Commit to opening the book. Want to run daily? Do not lace up for 5 miles. Just put on your shoes. Sounds trivial? Good. That is the point. Because neuroscience shows that once a behavior slips past the prefrontal cortex as gatekeeping, once it is labeled non-threatening, begins automating. A 2016 MIT study tracking neural activity during habit formation found that consistent microactions activate the dorsolateral striatum before conscious awareness kicks in. In other words, your brain starts running the program while you are still deciding whether to start. And here is where most miss the deeper layer. The invisibility threshold is not just about size. It's about perception. Elite performers do not just make actions small. They strip them of identity weight. They do not go to the gym to become fit. They put on their shoes after coffee. No grand narrative. No future self-projection. Just a sensory cue linked to a microscopic response. This is why their habits survive chaos. Miss a day? No guilt spiral. Because the contract was not with performance. Cheer was with continuity, below the noise floor. Compare that to the standard model. I failed my workout, so I am undisciplined. Versus, I did not put on my shoes today. Tomorrow, I will. One triggers shame. The other triggers re-engagement. And over time, that difference compounds into chasms. But, and this is critical, invisibility without strategic direction becomes invisible decay. You can be perfectly consistent at something that leads nowhere. Which is why the next silent habit is not about adding more. It is about removing everything that does not compound. Because elite performers know, subtraction is the highest form of leverage. And they practice it in silence, never announcing what they have stopped, only letting the results speak. The most powerful habits are not the ones you add. Teeth are the ones you silently erase. Picture a bonsai tree. Its elegance is not born from what the gardener adds, but from what they cut away, again and again, with surgical precision. Every branch removed redirects energy to the structure that remains. Without that pruning, it is just a shrub. That is strategic neglect. Not laziness, not avoidance. A deliberate, invisible subtraction of behaviors that drain compounding potentially, even if they feel productive. Here is how it works in the real world. A founder stops attending networking events. Not because they are antisocial, but because those 2 hours per week cost them 6 hours of recovery focus. They never announce it, they just disappear from the scene. Meanwhile, their competitor brags about hustling at every mixer and wonders why their product stalls. Or consider this. Warren Buffett once said his secret was not picking winning investments. He was saying no to thousands of decent ones. His entire fortune rests on what he did not do, and science backs this quiet calculus. A 2020 study published in Nature Human Behavior tracked high-performing knowledge workers and found that top quartile performers spent 42% less time on communication tools than their peers, yet produced 3.2 times more high-impact output. Why? Because they treated attention like oxygen, finite, non-renewable, and easily contaminated. But here is where most fail. They confuse activity with leverage. Answering emails feels productive. Scrolling industry news feels strategic. Attending optional meetings feels collaborative. Yet each of these is a silent tax on your compounding engine, because every decision, every context switch, burns glucose in your prefrontal cortex. And once that reserve dips, your brain defaults to autopilot, which means defaulting to distraction, not depth. Elite performers know this, so they do not optimize for busyness. They optimize for cognitive runway. They delete apps that ping. They mute group chats. They decline opportunities that do not align with irreversible momentum. And they do it without apology, because they understand a brutal truth. What you tolerate, you normalize. What you normalize, you become. So they prune before the rot spreads. But even perfect pruning fails if your timing is off. Because compounding does not obey your calendar. It obeys your biology. And the next silent habit exploits that truth with eerie precision. You do not fail your habits because you lack discipline. You fail because you ignore your biology. Time is not neutral. It is charged with biological voltage. And elite performers do not schedule habits. Anchor them to moments when their nervous system is already primed for action. Imagine the surfer. They do not paddle harder to catch a wave. They wait for the exact swell, then glide. That is temporal anchoring, taking behavior to natural peaks in energy, focus, and neurochemistry, not fighting time, writing it. Here is how it works in practice. A programmer does not block 2 hours for deep work at 2 p.m. because by then, cortisol has dipped, glucose is low, and decision fatigue has set in. Instead, they write their most complex code between 9 and 10, 30 a.m. SM, right after their morning coffee, when dopamine and norepinephrine naturally peak. The habit is not forced, it is harvested. And this is not speculation. A landmark 2022 study from the University of California tracked 200 professionals using wearable biometrics and found that individuals who aligned high cognition tasks with their personal circadian peaks were 3.7 times more likely to sustain those behaviors long term. Reduced work rated 68% higher. And quality by blind evaluators. But here is what no one tells you. Your best time is not universal, it is genetic. Chronotype research shows that 40% of people are not morning larks, yet they force themselves into 5-ish routines because of social mimicry. The result? They build habits on sand. Elite performers reject this theater. They track their own rhythm. The writer who drafts only during the post-lunch dip, not despite it, but because theta waves enhance creative association. The investor who makes no trades before 11 a.m., knowing their risk assessment centers do not fully activate until cortisol stabilizes. They do not ask, "What should I do?" They ask, when am I already wired to do it? And then they embed the habit into that moment like a seed into fertile soil. No willpower needed, just alignment. Even their environment conspires silently. The smell of coffee triggers writing. The sound of rain cues reflection. The act of closing their laptop lid signals transition, not as a task, but as a ritual coded into sensory memory. This is contextual cueing, where time, space, and state fuse into an automatic trigger. But even perfect timing collapses if you're measuring the wrong thing. Because most people track outputs, emails sent, pages written, calories burned, while the sound compounding happens in the inputs no one sees. And that is where the next habit operates, in the shadows of measurement, where real leverage hides. You are being sabotaged by the numbers you celebrate. Likes, followers, revenue, completed tasks. These are not metrics, dear mirages. They look like progress, but they lag reality by months, sometimes years. And worse, they trigger performance anxiety, not precision. Elite performers do not track what the world sees. They track what only they can see, tiny, leading indicators that whisper momentum long before results scream it. Picture a submarine navigating in total darkness. It does not rely on surface landmarks. It uses sonar pings, silent, internal, precise, to map its course. That is invisible metrics, private signals that confirm you are on trajectory, even when external validation is absent. Here is how it works in practice. A novelist does not count published books. They track deep writing minutes, time spent in flow without editing, distraction, or self-judgment. If that number rises for 20 days straight, they know a masterpiece is forming, even if the manuscript looks chaotic. An investor does not watch portfolio value daily. They monitor decision clarity, how many trades they did not make because they stuck to their edge. No one sees that restraint, but it is the only thing separating compounding from gambling, and science confirms the power of this approach. A 2023 Harvard Business School study analyzed 412 high-performing professionals over 18 months and found that those who used private, process-based metrics were 5.2 times more likely to sustain peak performance during uncertainty. Why? Because they decoupled self-worth from volatile outcomes. But here's the trap most fall into. They confuse visibility with validity. If I cannot post it, it does not count. If it is not quantifiable publicly, it is not real. That mindset turns habits into performances, and performance dies the moment attention fades. The silent alternative? Design metrics so small, so specific, they feel almost trivial, but so predictive, they are terrifyingly accurate. Not, did I work out? But, did I move within 10 minutes of waking? Not, did I close a client? But did I ask one uncomfortable question that revealed true need? These are not goals. They are diagnostic pulses. And because they are invisible to others, they are immune to social distortion. No comparison. No inflation. Just clean feedback between you and your system. This is how compounding stays pure. But even perfect metrics collapse if your identity has not shifted first. Because habits do not stick when you do something new. They'll stick when you become someone new. And the elite do that silently, long before the world notices. You do not become who you say you are. You become who you rehearse in silence. Most people announce their new identity before they have earned it. I am a writer. I am an entrepreneur. I am disciplined. And then, predictably, they crumble at the first sign of friction. Why? Because identity declared is identity fragile. The brain treats it like a performance, not a truth. And performances require energy. Truths require none. Elite performers do the opposite. They compress their future self into microscopic behaviors so subtle, Even they barely notice the shift, until one day, the old identity no longer fits. Picture a blacksmith forging a blade. They do not shout, "I am making steel." They simply heat, hammer, fold, again and again, until the metal forgets it was ever raw. The transformation happens in the repetition, not the declaration. That is identity compression, embedding your next self into daily microacts that require no fanfare, only fidelity. Here is how it works in practice. A woman who wants to become a leader does not start by calling herself CEO. She begins by speaking last in meetings, listening fully, then distilling clarity in one sentence. No title needed, just behavior that aligns with the neural signature of authority. A man rebuilding his health does not declare, "I am fit now." He places his running shoes beside his bed every night, not to run, just to see them, to let his subconscious absorb the silent contract. This is who lives here, and neuroscience validates this quiet alchemy. A 2021 fMRI study from Stanford revealed that when people adopt identity-linked behaviors without verbalizing them, activity in the medial prefrontal cortex, seat of self-concept, shifts within 17 days. But when they announce the identity publicly first, the same region shows increased cognitive dissonance under stress, triggering self-sabotage. The lesson? Your brain believes what you do consistently in private, not what you proclaim in public. So the elite compress identity like data. Not "I am a creator," but "I open my notebook before checking my phone." Not "I am calm," but "I take one breath before replying to any message." These are not affirmations. They are neural implants. And because they are invisible, they avoid the ego tax. Mental cost of defending a label that has not yet been lived. This is how change becomes irreversible. But even a perfectly compressed identity can unravel if your environment still allows escape. Because the final silent habit is not about will. It is about architecture so absolute, quitting becomes cognitively impossible. And that is where true compounding becomes inevitable. The final habit is not done. Is designed. Most people rely on motivation to keep going. Elite performers remove the option to stop. Not through willpower, not through grit, through silent, structural commitment. So elegant, so absolute, that quitting becomes cognitively impossible. Picture a one-way door in a submarine. Once sealed, it does not matter how scared you get. You cannot go back. The only path is forward. That is non-reversal. Engineering your environment. So retreat requires more energy than persistence. And it is always quiet, never announced, rarely visible. Here is how it works in practice. A writer does not say, "I will finish my book." They sign a contract with a publisher, have penalties for delay, wire half their savings into an escrow account they lose if they miss the deadline. No social post, no declaration, just irreversible stakes. An entrepreneur does not try to build a business. They resign from their job before securing funding, knowing that survival now depends on execution, not hope. The fear does not vanish. It transforms into fuel. This is not recklessness. It is strategic entrapment, and behavioral science confirms its power. A 2019 study in psychological science tracked over 1,500 individuals pursuing long-term goals. Those who created pre-commitment devices, binding future choices through present action, were 8.3 times more likely to achieve their objectives than those relying on daily discipline. Why? Because they bypassed the decision point entirely. No negotiation, no debate, just inevitability. But here is what makes this habit uniquely silent. It operates in the background. You delete social media apps before a deep work block. Not during temptation. You schedule a public demo before you have built the product. Not after you feel ready. You tell one trusted person your deadline. not your entire network, so accountability stays precise, not performative. These are not motivational tricks, they are cognitive locks. And because they are installed in advance, when clarity is high and emotion is low, they survive the chaos of execution. The brain, faced with no exit ramp, stops wasting energy on "should I quit?" and redirects all resources to "how do I solve this?" But that shift from deliberation to deployment is where compounding accelerates beyond recognition. But even this ultimate habit remains invisible. No trophies, no announcements, just the quiet certainty that a path behind you has vanished. And the only thing left is the work, which brings us to the truth beneath all silent habits. They do not seek proof, they become it. You were taught that results come from effort you can see for first loud discipline, public declarations, and visible grind. But now you know the truth. Real compounding happens in silence, in habits too small to announce, in behaviors you stop, not just start, in rhythms aligned with your biology, not your calendar, in metrics only you understand, in identities rehearsed before they are claimed, and in commitments so absolute, retreat is no longer an option. This is how the top 1% operate, not with noise, but with precision, not with motivation, but with architecture. And if you have felt the exhaustion of performative productivity, if you have ever restarted the same habit a dozen times, if you have watched others surge ahead while you burn energy just staying in place, then this was not just insight, it was relief. But here is what comes next. Even the most elegant system collapses under emotional turbulence. Stress, frustration, impatience. Do not just disrupt your day. They erase weeks of silent compounding in seconds, which means the next frontier is not discipline. It is control, not suppression, not positivity, but the kind of emotional sovereignty that turns volatility into leverage, while others lose years to reactivity. That is the subject of our next transmission. Emotional control is a competitive advantage. Here is why. If you recognize yourself in what you have just heard, if you are done chasing visibility and ready to build in silence, you are not alone. You are among the few who understand. The world only sees the outcome, but the work is always done in the quiet.